The military transport touched down at Forward Operating Base Diamante on a Tuesday morning, kicking up a wall of dust that settled over the runway in slow, suffocating waves. Captain Elena Reyes sat near the back of the C-130, watching the base materialize through the cargo door as it lowered. 12 years in the Army Medical Corps, 4 deployments, 2 commendations. This was supposed to be a routine transfer, a rotation stateside, a fresh start after 18 months in the Kandahar Valley. She was ready for it. What she wasn't ready for was the way the world tilted the moment her boots hit the tarmac. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb was waiting at the personnel office with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't salute, didn't shake her hand. He just looked her up and down like he was assessing a malfunctioning piece of equipment. "Captain Reyes," he said flatly, "you're in the medical bay. That's the white building past the motor pool. Chow's at 1800. Don't miss it." He handed her a laminated base map and walked away before she could respond. Elena had experienced a lot of dismissal in her career. It came with being a woman in combat medicine. But this felt different. This felt personal, and she hadn't even checked in yet. The medical bay was understaffed and overworked. The senior medic, a warrant officer named Torres, gave her a brief tour that lasted exactly 8 minutes. The supplies were organized. The equipment was functional. The atmosphere was tense. When Elena asked about current patient loads and standing protocols, Torres answered in monosyllables before disappearing into the back office. By evening, the full picture crystallized. She found out at dinner in the chow hall. A group of junior enlisted soldiers at the next table didn't bother lowering their voices. One of them, a specialist with a crooked smirk, was telling a story about how the base had requested a real medic to handle a critical casualty evacuation the previous week, and instead they'd gotten stuck with whoever happened to be available. "That's why they probably shipped her in," another soldier said, glancing at Elena. "They needed space, so they sent us the desk jockey." Elena kept her eyes on her plate. She'd learned long ago that feeding the fire never extinguished it. The narrative spread through the battalion like a virus. By the 3rd day, it was gospel. Captain Reyes was a medical administrator who'd never seen real combat, shuffled around to make room for actual operators, probably had connections, probably couldn't handle the pressure of field medicine. The rumor mill was particularly vicious because no one had bothered to check her actual record. On the 4th day, she was assigned to assist with training exercises. It was basic medical response protocol, treating simulated casualties, running triage, executing emergency procedures. Elena set up her stations with meticulous care, reviewed all the scenarios, and waited for the exercise to begin. The first simulated casualty was wheeled in, a soldier with a sucking chest wound and massive hemorrhage. Elena moved without hesitation, calling out steps, delegating tasks, making decisions with clinical precision. She was efficient. She was calm. She was exactly what a combat medic should be. When it was over, she expected acknowledgement. What she got was silence and sideways glances. That night, she overheard 2 platoon sergeants talking in the hallway outside her quarters. Their voices carried through the thin walls. "Can you believe they put her in charge of casualties?" one said. "She probably looked up how to do CPR on her phone before this morning. I heard she was stationed at a hospital, not with a unit. Probably never seen a real combat situation. Exactly. Command's getting soft, shipping us people who don't belong here." Elena lay in the dark, listening to them laugh as they walked away. She'd been at the base for 4 days. In those 4 days, she'd gone from a decorated soldier to a punchline. No one had asked about her deployments. No one had looked at her service record. They'd all simply decided who she was based on the fact that she was a woman in a male-dominated field, fresh off a transfer. The worst part wasn't the mockery. It was that no one, not Sergeant Webb, not Warrant Officer Torres, not the platoon sergeants or the junior enlisted soldiers, seemed interested in discovering whether their assumptions were right or wrong. By the end of the first week, Elena had been excluded from the unit's operational briefings, assigned the lowest priority medical tasks, and made the subject of jokes that grew progressively crueler. When she offered to assist with field operations, her request was quietly shelved. When she suggested improvements to the medical bay's emergency protocols, Torres dismissed her input without consideration. She had survived 4 deployments, treated casualties under fire, and saved lives in conditions that would break most people. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. At Forward Operating Base Diamante, she was just another desk jockey who didn't belong. On the 8th day, something changed. During a routine equipment inventory, Elena noticed a discrepancy in the surgical supply logs. It was minor. A few items marked as expired when they clearly weren't. She corrected the entries and made a note in the system. That same afternoon, she found herself called into a closed-door meeting with Major Harlow, the battalion commander. His office was sparse and cold, and he watched her with an intensity that suggested he was measuring something she couldn't quite see. "Captain Reyes," he said slowly, "I'm going through some administrative requests. I notice you've been reassigned from your previous posting with very little detail in the paperwork. That's unusual." Elena's pulse quickened. She'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it, but not in this context. "I requested the transfer, sir," she said carefully. "Standard rotation." Harlow leaned back in his chair. "That's what the official record says, but I don't like gaps, and I don't like making assumptions about personnel." He opened a file on his desk. Not hers, she realized, but something else. "Tell me, Captain, what makes a good combat medic?" Elena wasn't sure if this was a test or a threat. "Either way," she answered honestly. "Knowing when to save lives, sir, and knowing when to save the mission." Harlow closed the file without showing her what was inside. His expression didn't change. "Dismissed, Captain. And Reyes, welcome to Diamante. Officially, I mean." Elena left his office with more questions than answers. But for the first time since she'd arrived, she had the sense that someone was actually looking at her. Not at the assumptions, not at the rumors, at her. The question was whether it would matter. The conversation in the gym started the way most base gossip did, carelessly, with too many people in one place and not enough awareness of who might be listening. Elena was using the weight room early before most of the battalion showed up. She was running through a routine, nothing special, just maintaining her fitness, when 3 soldiers from the motor pool came in, still talking about something they'd been discussing outside. "Did you see that?" one of them said. "She was handling the M240 like she actually knew what she was doing. Most medics treat weapons like they're made of glass." "Maybe she watched a training video," another replied. "Doesn't mean anything." "I'm telling you, there's something off about her," the first soldier insisted. "She moves different, like she's actually trained." Elena kept her head down, focused on her reps. But she was listening. The comments would have been harmless except for what happened next. 2 days later, during a medical training scenario in the field, one of the junior enlisted medics asked Elena to demonstrate a field tourniquet application. As she worked through it, she automatically adjusted the soldier's positioning and posture in ways that went beyond basic medical training. She was thinking about tactical advantage, how the casualty would be exposed during extraction, where enemy fire would likely come from, the optimal angles for defense. The junior medic noticed. He didn't say anything in the moment, but Elena saw the question form behind his eyes. Why does a combat medic move like someone thinking about a firefight? That same week, during a equipment inspection, Specialist Danny Garrett, the one with the crooked smirk, made a crack about her handling a rifle. "Careful, Captain," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Medics usually stick to bandages. You might hurt yourself." Elena had been pushed around for nearly 2 weeks. She'd let the jokes slide, let the dismissals pass, let the assumptions settle into the base's culture like sediment. But something in her had shifted after that meeting with Major Harlow. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance. It was clarity. She didn't need these people to believe in her. She just needed to stop letting them define her. She set down the equipment she'd been checking and turned to face Garrett directly. "Specialist, when was the last time you qualified on the range?" 3 months ago, he said, defensive. Why? Because I qualified last month, Elena replied. Expert rating. If you want to compare notes, I'm available. Otherwise, I suggest you focus on your own competency. The gym went quiet. Garrett's face flushed. He didn't have a comeback, so he just walked away, and several other soldiers suddenly became very interested in their own equipment. It was a small moment, but it was the first time Elena had pushed back, and people noticed. The rumors shifted after that. They didn't stop, they just changed shape. Instead of "she's useless," the whispers became "she acts like she's special," and "she's got an attitude." The soldiers who'd been mocking her had moved on to deciding she was arrogant instead of incompetent. It was a different kind of dismissal, but it was still dismissal. More concerning were the questions. Specialist Marcus Chen, a smart kid from Supply, started asking about her previous assignments. Casually at first, just making conversation in the chow line. But the questions were specific. Which hospitals had she been stationed at? How long had she been overseas? What kind of cases had she handled? Elena answered carefully, giving him nothing that would feed the rumor mill, but also nothing that would satisfy real curiosity. Chen seemed intelligent enough to notice that she was being evasive, and the look on his face suggested it only deepened whatever mystery he thought he'd uncovered. Then came the file incident. Chen's job in Supply gave him access to base records and filing systems. One afternoon, he was pulling routine documentation for equipment transfers when he stumbled on an old reference file for Elena's previous posting. The file itself was locked. He didn't have authorization to open it. But the header was visible. What caught his attention was the classification level and the unit designation. It wasn't a medical unit. He mentioned it to Elena 2 days later, casually, while she was picking up replacement supplies for the medical bay. "Hey, Captain, I saw something weird in the system the other day. Just curious, did you ever work with special operations?" Elena stopped moving. It was just a fraction of a second, but it was long enough for Chen to see her reaction. "No," she said, and continued with what she was doing. "Where would you get that idea?" "Just something in a file header," Chen said. "Probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and Elena knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. By the following Monday, new rumors were circulating. Not about her competence or her attitude, but about her background. Some soldiers were saying she'd worked with special forces. Others claimed she'd been involved in classified operations. A few suggested she'd been dishonorably discharged for something no one wanted to talk about. The gossip had evolved from mockery into genuine mystery, and mystery was far more dangerous than contempt. Warrant Officer Torres called her into his office and closed the door. "What's with all the talk about your background?" he asked without preamble. "I don't know what you mean," Elena said. "The soldiers are saying you used to work with Tier 1 units, that you were classified, that there's something in your file that's restricted." Torres studied her face carefully. That true? Elena made a decision. She could lie, deflect, or maintain the silence that had kept her isolated since the moment she arrived. But Torres was the senior medical authority on the base, and if the rumors were going to poison her work environment further, she needed to at least control what he believed. "My previous assignment involved supporting special operations," she said. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics, but my medical credentials and my current qualifications are exactly what they appear to be." Torres leaned back in his chair. He didn't look angry or suspicious. He looked calculating. "I'm going to make a call," he said finally, "to verify your file. If what you're saying is accurate, then we're going to have a conversation about why Command didn't brief me properly on your background." "That's your call to make," Elena said. She left his office not knowing what would happen next. Torres had the authority to pull her full record, the restricted parts that most people at the base didn't have clearance to see. If he did that, everything would change. Either her secret would stay buried under layers of classification, or it would be exposed in the worst possible way. For the next 3 days, Elena waited. She performed her duties. She kept her distance from the growing whisper campaign. She didn't mention the conversation to anyone, and Torres didn't volunteer any information about what he'd learned or who he'd called. The tension was unbearable, not because she was afraid of being exposed, but because exposure would change everything. The battalion would know the truth. Major Harlow would know the truth. And she would have to figure out how to operate in a unit that had spent 2 weeks treating her like an outsider before discovering exactly who she was. On the 4th day, something happened that forced the question. An urgent radio call came through the medical bay. A ranger squad was pinned down 2 clicks northeast of the base. Multiple casualties reported. The company needed to mobilize immediately for a casualty evacuation and fire support. Torres grabbed Elena before she could even process the order fully. "You're going with the extraction team," he said, "as primary medical support. You ready?" Elena met his eyes. There was something different in his expression now, something like respect, or at least acknowledgement. "Always," she said. As she moved toward the equipment locker to gear up, Elena realized that whatever Torres had discovered in her file, whatever he'd learned from whoever he'd called, it had shifted something in how he saw her. The question wasn't whether she was ready. It was what would happen when the Ranger Squad and the extraction team saw what she could really do. The question wasn't theoretical anymore. In less than an hour, she'd find out. Major James Harlow had commanded Forward Operating Base Diamante for 8 months. In that time, he'd learned to read his soldiers the way other men read books. He could spot a morale problem before it festered. He could identify a weak link in the chain of command from a single meeting. And he could sense when something didn't add up. Captain Elena Reyes didn't add up. On the surface, her record was clean. 12 years in the medical corps, 4 deployments, 2 commendations. The paperwork was in order, the assignments were documented, and her transfer request had been processed through normal channels. But there were gaps. Small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking. A 6-month deployment listed as support operations with no unit designation. A temporary duty assignment to a location that wasn't identified in the file. References to special classification that required higher-level clearance to access. Harlow had spent 16 years as a commissioned officer in the Army. He'd worked with intelligence operatives, special forces liaisons, and classified task forces. He recognized the signature of restricted files the moment he saw them. The question was why a decorated combat medic with apparent ties to special operations had requested a transfer to a standard battalion at a forward operating base that saw moderate but not exceptional combat action. He decided to find out. Harlow didn't use the normal channels. Instead, he picked up the phone and called an old friend, a colonel he'd served with at Fort Bragg who now worked in Army Human Resources Command. The conversation was brief and carefully worded. The kind of discussion that happened in military circles when you needed information but didn't want to leave a paper trail. "I've got a captain on my base," Harlow said. "Medical Corps, requesting information on her previous assignments. Some of the designation numbers are flagged as restricted. I need to know if there's a security issue I should be aware of." The colonel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It had the careful tone of someone choosing words with precision. "What's her name?" he asked. "Captain Elena Reyes." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm going to call you back from a different line," the colonel said. "Give me 30 minutes. When he called back, the colonel got straight to the point. "Your captain's file is restricted above your clearance level," he said. "But I can tell you this. There's nothing in her record that would indicate a security risk to your unit. On the contrary. If she requested a standard assignment, there's probably a reason for that. And I'd suggest you don't push the issue further. Some files stay locked for operational security, and this is one of them." "Understood," Harlow said. "What about her competency? Medically speaking?" The colonel actually laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Her medical competency is the least of your concerns, Major. That woman could probably teach your entire battalion things you didn't know. After the call ended, Harlow sat in his office for a long time, thinking. He'd worked with enough operators and intelligence personnel to read between the lines. Captain Reyes wasn't just a medic with special operations support experience. She was something more than that. Something classified. Something that the higher echelons of command considered significant enough to restrict from standard military records. And she was being treated like an incompetent desk jockey by his battalion. Harlow didn't immediately intervene. Instead, he observed. Over the next week, he noticed things. The way Elena moved through spaces with tactical awareness, calculating angles and distances like someone who'd been trained to think about cover and suppressive fire. The confidence in her hands when she worked with medical equipment. The same kind of confidence he'd seen in master-level operators. The way she handled the Specialist Garrett incident, standing her ground without aggression, establishing authority without demanding it. These were the markers of someone with real training, real experience, real competence. He also noticed the effect her presence had on others. The whispers had evolved. Chen's question about special operations had circulated through the base like an infection. Soldiers who'd been dismissive were now uncertain. The platoon sergeants who'd mocked her were now exchanging glances that suggested they were reconsidering their initial judgments. Torres came to see him on the 4th day of the rumor spiral. "Sir, I need to talk to you about Captain Reyes," Torres said, closing the office door behind him. Harlow gestured for him to sit. "Go ahead." "I made a call to verify her clearance level," Torres said carefully. "I wanted to confirm some of the background information. The person I spoke with, a major at Medical Command, told me that Captain Reyes's previous assignment was classified and that I shouldn't pursue additional questions about it. But he also told me that her qualifications are exceptional and that I should be fortunate to have her on my team." Harlow kept his expression neutral. "Did he now?" "Yes, sir." That's when I realized something was off. A standard combat medic doesn't get that kind of response from Medical Command. Torres paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think she might be more than what her cover file suggests." "Your concern is noted, Warrant Officer," Harlow said. "However, her current assignment is as a medic in your medical bay. That's where her qualifications should be focused. Can she perform that role effectively?" "Yes, sir, without question." "Then I suggest we move forward based on her demonstrated competency in that role, and not on speculation about her background." It was clear dismissal. Torres left the office understanding that this conversation wasn't supposed to happen again, and that whatever Elena's true background was, Harlow had decided to keep it to himself. But Harlow was already thinking ahead. The base had been relatively quiet for the past 2 weeks. Routine patrols, standard security operations, nothing that required the kind of capability he suspected Elena possessed. Statistically, that could change at any moment. A raid. An ambush. A situation that required more than standard battalion-level response. And when that happened, Harlow wanted to know exactly what resources he had available. Elena represented an unknown asset. Someone whose training and experience went far beyond what her medical credentials suggested. Someone whose file was restricted at levels that indicated serious operational significance. And someone who'd been isolated and marginalized by her own unit simply because they'd made assumptions based on her gender and her transfer status. It was waste, and Harlow didn't tolerate waste. On the afternoon of the 4th day after Torres's visit, Harlow made a decision. He called Elena into his office again, a second meeting, which was unusual. This time he got straight to the point. "Captain Reyes, I'm assigning you as primary medical support for the next combat extraction operation. It may come with short notice. I want you ready to deploy at a moment's notice with whatever gear and personnel you need." Elena's expression didn't change, but Harlow saw the subtle shift in her eyes. She understood what he was really saying. He knew. Not the specifics, not the classified details, but he knew that she was more than what the battalion thought, and he was making space for her to be that. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm ready." "I believe you are," Harlow replied. He paused, then added carefully, "Captain, the soldiers in this battalion are good people. They made assumptions about you based on incomplete information. That's a failure of command, and that failure falls on me. I'm working to correct it. In the meantime, don't let their doubts affect your readiness or your confidence in your capabilities." Elena straightened slightly. "I appreciate that, sir. You're dismissed, Captain, and Reyes. When that call comes, and it will come, I want you to remember that this base has full confidence in you. Whatever you need to do, we'll back your play." After she left, Harlow sat back and waited. He'd made his position clear. He'd signaled to Elena that he knew more than he was saying and that he was on her side. Now it was a matter of time. The radio traffic had been picking up all afternoon. Enemy activity in the hills northeast of the base. Ranger teams operating in the area. The tension in the Tactical Operations Center was rising. Harlow's instinct told him the call would come soon. When it did, Elena would finally have the opportunity to show this battalion who she really was. And maybe, just maybe, the soldiers who'd spent 2 weeks mocking her would finally understand why Command had been willing to keep such significant capabilities quiet. The question was whether Elena would be ready to let that happen. The call came at 14:47 hours. "All units, be advised. Ranger Element Bravo 2 is reporting contact with armed insurgent force. Grid coordinates." The radio traffic was clipped, professional, and urgent. Elena heard it through the speakers in the medical bay as she was restocking surgical supplies. She froze, listening. "Bravo 2 reports multiple casualties. Pinned position, receiving effective fire from Northeast Ridge. Requesting immediate casualty evacuation and fire support. All available units respond." Torres was already moving, barking orders. "Reyes, get your gear. Full combat load. We're going up." Elena didn't hesitate. She'd been expecting this call since Harlow's meeting, since Torres's cryptic question about special operations, since the moment she'd set foot on the base. She grabbed her aid bag, her real aid bag, the one that held everything she'd actually need, and headed for the armory to draw weapons and ammunition. 5 minutes later, she was in the back of a Humvee with Torres and 2 junior medics, heading toward the pickup zone. The drive took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of bouncing over rough terrain, the vehicle's gunner scanning the horizon, radio chatter constant and tense. The Ranger squad had called in their position near a dry riverbed 2 clicks northeast. The extraction team would insert at a forward position and move to the contact site on foot. Speed was essential. The longer the Rangers remained pinned, the higher the casualty count would be. Elena checked her weapons as the Humvee slowed and began to turn off-road. M4 rifle, 9mm pistol, combat knife, and her aid bag, packed with tourniquets, gauze, IV lines, antibiotics, and enough medical knowledge to keep someone breathing long enough to reach a hospital. The weapons were just precaution. The medical gear was her real job. Or so she told herself. The Humvee stopped 200 meters from the dry riverbed. The extraction team dismounted fast. Elena, Torres, the 2 junior medics, and 4 soldiers from the rifle squad, assigned to provide suppressive fire. Torres immediately took point, with Elena moving behind him and slightly left, the position of a trained operator rather than a medic. The radio crackled. "Bravo 2, this is extraction team, moving to your position now. Hold fire, we're coming in from the south." "Copy that. We've got heavy fire from the northeast ridge, at least 2 machine gun positions. We're in the riverbed, they've got the high ground. 3 KIA, 2 WIA, 1 critical. We need fire support." Elena's mind cataloged the information instantly. 3 dead already. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Machine gun positions giving the insurgents overwhelming fire advantage. The Ranger squad was dug in and defensible but pinned down. They needed either supporting fire or a distraction. The extraction team was supposed to provide both. They moved down the slope toward the riverbed, weapons ready, eyes scanning the terrain. The junior medic stayed close to Torres. Elena was already thinking about approaches, about angles, about where the enemy fire was coming from based on the sound signatures in the radio traffic. They were 40 meters from the riverbed when the world exploded. Not literally. There were no explosions, but the volume of fire that suddenly erupted from the ridge made it feel that way. The insurgents had been waiting. Not just waiting for the Ranger squad to call for help, but waiting for someone to come help them. They'd set a trap, positioned their machine guns for maximum effect, and when the extraction team committed to the movement, they opened fire. Elena heard the rounds impacting around her, that distinctive crack of supersonic bullets passing overhead. She dove left, toward a rocky outcropping, her weapon coming up. The rifle squad returned fire immediately, establishing suppressive positions. Torres was moving toward the riverbed, directing the junior medics to get down and establish a medical position. One of the junior medics, a kid named Patterson, took a round in the upper leg. Elena saw him go down, saw the blood spray. She started moving toward him, but fire from the ridge forced her back behind cover. The enemy was being disciplined. They weren't wasting ammunition. They were placing rounds at targets, maintaining volume, keeping the extraction team pinned just like they'd kept the Rangers pinned. The situation deteriorated in seconds. The rifle squad's suppressive fire wasn't effective. The enemy was too well positioned, had too much elevation advantage. Patterson was bleeding out. The junior medic with him, a specialist named Chen, was trying to apply a tourniquet but was pinned down and panicking. Torres was calling for fire support on the radio, but the nearest air assets were 15 minutes out. Elena did a tactical calculation in the space of a heartbeat. The Rangers needed immediate extraction and medical attention. Patterson needed immediate care. The extraction team was being systematically dismantled by enemy fire that had the advantage of position and firepower. Something in her shifted. Not consciously, not deliberately. It was instinct, the kind of instinct that came from years of training in environments where thinking too much meant dying. She saw one of the rifle squad soldiers, Sergeant Malik, taking fire from the northeast position. He was good, returning fire with discipline, but he was being suppressed by sustained machine gun fire. As Elena watched, he took a round in the shoulder, spun back, and fell hard. His M240 machine gun skittered across the rocks. Elena didn't think. She moved. She ran the 20 meters to Malik's position in a combat low, staying below the sight line of the enemy guns. Malik was conscious but hit. The round had caught him high on the shoulder, and he was bleeding freely. She moved past him without stopping, grabbed the M240, and pulled it into firing position. The machine gun was warm from sustained fire. Malik had been hitting the enemy position, which meant she had a target point and a general direction. Elena settled the weapon into her shoulder, felt the familiar weight and balance, and acquired the target zone through the iron sights. The training took over. She'd qualified expert on machine guns before she'd ever become a medic, before she'd been assigned to combat support roles, before her file had been classified and restricted and locked away in records rooms. The instinct was deeper than anything that had happened in the past 2 weeks, deeper than the humiliation or the isolation or the doubts. It was muscle memory forged in places and times she couldn't talk about. Elena opened fire. The M240 thundered in her hands, a rhythmic roar of controlled violence. She was placing rounds on the enemy position, not wildly, not in panic, but with precision, with tactical awareness, walking her fire across the ridge where the insurgent machine guns were positioned. The enemy fire that had been suppressing the extraction team shifted toward her. Rounds impacted around her position, but she didn't flinch. She adjusted her angle slightly and kept firing. Next to her, Malik was staring at her in shock. "Captain, what are you—" "Stay down," Elena said, still firing. "Don't move." She kept the gun working, maintaining sustained fire on the ridge. The enemy positions were becoming less effective. Their fire was now reactive rather than disciplined, responding to her suppressive fire instead of controlling the battlefield. In the 30 seconds of her engagement, the dynamic shifted. The extraction team was no longer pinned. Torres had moved Patterson to a covered position and was already working on the tourniquet. The rifle squad was re-establishing a perimeter. Elena heard boots behind her. One of the rifle squad soldiers was moving to flank the enemy position while she kept them suppressed. She adjusted her firing angle to maintain coverage of the ridge without hitting her own people. The insurgent fire began to diminish. Not because they were pulling back, but because they'd realized that whatever they were facing was responding with overwhelming precision. The element of surprise was gone. The tactical advantage was shifting. Elena fired until the enemy positions went silent, until the incoming fire dropped to sporadic and ineffective, until the moment passed. Then she controlled her breathing, assessed her ammunition, and lowered the weapon. The silence that followed was profound. Torres stared at her from across the position. The junior medic Chen was frozen in place. The rifle squad soldiers who'd been suppressed moments before were looking at Elena with expressions that ranged from shock to awe to something approaching fear. No one said anything. From the riverbed, she heard Ranger squad members calling out position reports. From the radio, command was asking for status. But in the immediate space around Elena, there was only stunned silence. She set the machine gun down carefully and picked up her aid bag. "Torres, what's your status on the wounded?" Her voice was calm, professional, completely ordinary, as if she'd just been sitting in the medical bay restocking supplies instead of laying down machine gun fire with tactical precision. Torres took a breath. "Patterson stable, tourniquets holding. We need to move to the Rangers and assess the critical casualty." "Let's go," Elena said. As they moved toward the riverbed, Elena felt the weight of what had just happened settling over her. The extraction team now knew. The Rangers would know. And within hours, the entire base would know. There was no going back to being the dismissed medic anymore. There was only forward, into whatever came next. The medical evacuation was textbook precise. Elena moved between the two Rangers with critical injuries with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The Ranger squad's combat medic, a specialist named Cross, watched her work with an intensity that suggested he was trying to decode what he was seeing. She placed IVs with one hand while applying hemostatic gauze with the other, calling out vitals to Torres in the kind of medical shorthand that only came from deep experience. Cross realized within 30 seconds that Captain Reyes wasn't just competent. She was operating at a level he'd only ever seen in military hospitals or in the field with Tier 1 units. The extraction took 14 minutes. The Humvee was rolling back toward base within 20. Elena in the back with the casualties, monitoring vitals, adjusting medications, keeping both wounded Rangers stable enough to reach the surgical teams waiting at the base medical facility. By the time they arrived at the base hospital, the story was already spreading. Specialist Patterson, the junior medic who'd been wounded, had been talking to anyone who would listen about what he'd seen. The rifle squad soldiers were recounting the machine gun engagement in the kind of detailed, awed tones that only came from people who'd almost died and been unexpectedly saved. Cross, the Ranger medic, had already filed a formal report mentioning Captain Reyes's performance. Major Harlow got the first official briefing within an hour. What happened next moved with military speed and precision. Harlow made 3 phone calls, one to the same colonel who told him Elena's file was restricted, one to battalion surgeon, and one directly to the regional medical command headquarters. By evening, Elena was sitting in Harlow's office with Torres, and the battalion surgeon was on a secure video call from brigade headquarters. The conversation was brief. "Captain Reyes, your previous assignment file is being declassified at the battalion level," the surgeon said formally. "The restriction is being lifted so that your commanding officer can properly understand your qualifications and background. You are authorized to discuss your previous service with Major Harlow and Warrant Officer Torres." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Elena said. 20 minutes later, Harlow knew the truth. Elena had spent 6 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2 years assigned to a Delta Force support element as a combat medic. She'd completed advanced weapons training, advanced tactics courses, and operational deployment cycles that went far beyond anything in a standard medical career track. Her medical assignments had been cover designations for classified operations. She'd seen more combat, made more life-or-death decisions under fire, and earned more operational expertise than most battalion commanders. She'd been relegated to supply duty and medical bay grunt work because nobody had bothered to look at what she actually was. Torres left the office shaking his head. 12 years, he said to Elena as they walked out. 12 years of service, and you never said a word about any of this. It wasn't my place to say, Elena replied. That's the whole point of classification. You operate based on need to know. Well, everyone needs to know now, Torres said. He was already making plans, reorganizing the medical bay's protocols, reassigning personnel, completely restructuring how the unit would operate with an actual Tier 1 combat medic on staff. The fallout from the revelation moved through the battalion like a shockwave. Specialist Garrett, who'd made the crack about Elena hurting herself with a rifle, found himself assigned to latrine duty for the next month. It wasn't official punishment. It was informal. The kind of subtle pressure that came from junior enlisted soldiers making it clear that mocking someone who just saved Rangers' lives wasn't going to be tolerated. He didn't show up in the chow hall for 2 days. When he finally did, no one would sit near him. The platoon sergeants who'd spent 2 weeks mocking her credentials were called into a private meeting with Torres. The details weren't public, but the change in their behavior was. They started treating Elena with the kind of careful respect that came from people who'd realized they'd massively misjudged someone they'd underestimated. Specialist Chen, the same one who discovered the classified file reference, went directly to Elena and apologized. "I'm sorry for poking into your business," he said. "I didn't know." "You did your job," Elena said. No apology needed. But she appreciated that he cared enough to apologize anyway. Major Harlow called an all-hands briefing 2 days after the firefight. He didn't go into operational details. Most of Elena's background remained classified, but he made clear that Captain Reyes had exceptional qualifications, that her previous assignments had been at the highest levels of military operations, and that the battalion was privileged to have her on staff. He also made clear that any further questions about her background or any lack of respect directed at her would be handled with the full weight of his command authority. The message was understood. Elena was no longer the dismissed newcomer. She was the veteran everyone had disrespected without knowing who she actually was. 3 days after the ambush, Elena was standing in the medical bay reorganizing supply protocols when one of the junior medics, a quiet specialist named Torres Jr., approached her hesitantly. "Captain," he said, "I wanted to say, I was part of the people making jokes about you. I didn't know." "I'm sorry." Elena looked at him carefully. He was genuinely apologetic, genuinely trying to acknowledge what he'd done wrong. "What matters now is moving forward," she said. "You're a good medic. I've seen your work. Keep doing that." He nodded and walked away, looking relieved. That evening, Elena sat alone in her quarters, looking at the base map on her wall. The same map Sergeant Webb had handed her on her first day with a dismissive instruction about where things were. She thought about the 2 weeks of mockery and isolation. She thought about the moment in the ambush when everything had changed. She thought about how quickly respect replaces contempt once people understand who they're actually dealing with. There was a knock on her door. Warrant Officer Torres stood outside, holding 2 coffees. "Thought you might want some company," he said. Elena gestured for him to come in. They sat in silence for a moment, just 2 experienced soldiers who understood without words what the past few days had cost and meant. "You know what I realized?" Torres said finally. "When I called that colonel about your file, I thought I was protecting the unit from uncertainty. Turns out I was protecting the unit from respecting someone who deserved it all along." "That's how it goes sometimes," Elena said. "Not anymore," Torres replied. "From here on out, you're not the transferred medic who everyone questions. You're Captain Reyes, Delta Force operator, combat veteran, and the best medical asset this battalion has ever had. That's the story now." Elena nodded. It felt different now. Not like she was being defined by others' judgments, but recognized for what she actually was. She'd come to Forward Operating Base Diamante expecting a quiet rotation, a chance to step back from the classified world and do straightforward medical work. Instead, she'd gotten something better. The hard-earned respect that came from proving herself under fire, from standing her ground against dismissal, and from letting her actions speak where her words never could. The base would never treat her the way they had during those first 2 weeks. That chapter was closed, and as Elena looked out at the desert landscape beyond her small window, she realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not her qualifications, not her experience, not who she actually was. She was finally, completely seen.